So with the recent explosions, mass across Lebanon of beepers and pagers and other electronic devices, the region seems to now really going into a whole new stage of battle and war. And the first question that comes to mind is obviously our hearts and souls go out to all innocent people. It seems like senseless hatred, senseless deaths, senseless war, such wasted resources. Will this end, and how will this end? It seems like something that will never go away. The thing that, now, as many of you have followed my discussions, my conversations on this topic, I go back even to 9/11. So we're talking about back 23 years ago. But especially in the last few years, it's very clear that this is not an isolated event. We're talking about a Middle East that has been ravaged by confrontation and has been faced with the battles between civilizations, you can call it, between Christianity, Judaism, Islam, all the children of Abraham. So in the bigger picture, that doesn't in any way minimize or make us feel better about it all, because the fact of the matter is, again, the loss, the tragedy, the displacement on all levels. But at least it gives us context that there's something going on in this region here, the Middle East, which is really the cradle of civilization. More or less, even scholars agree that civilization is traced to that area in the world, the Mesopotamian Valley. And especially when you follow the Bible, the biblical story of Abraham and then Isaac and Jacob and all the events, all taking place in this area. And then with the birth of the major religions, Judaism, and then later Christianity, and seven centuries later with Islam, and their continuous battles and wars, all that adds up and leads to an understanding that there's something deeper, cosmic happening here. There's not an excuse for anyone attacking anyone, for any murders, and especially for brutality. But it gives context that there's more than it's not a fight over land or over resources or even just control. There's a spiritual element to this. Some call it a religious war. And there's a spiritual confrontation. And that allows us to begin to understand how this will end. Because if you think of it that way, then it's not just this perpetual, forever hatred. Remember, the children of Ishmael, the son of Abraham, are the ancestors, at least in general terms, of the Arab-Muslim world. It was an Arab world that later embraced, not all of them embraced Islam. There are Christian Arabs, Arabs that are not Muslims, and Muslims that are not Arabs, as we know. The other son of Abraham, Isaac, became the ancestor of the Jewish people. In turn, Isaac had two children, Jacob and Esau, twins. Esau becomes the grandfather, the ancestor of the Roman Western Christian world, which later would become Christian. And Jacob, of course, as son of Isaac, continues that line, that lineage, which would give birth to the 12 tribes and ultimately to the Jewish people. And the Bible continues discussing it. But especially when you read the Bible closely, and you read its commentaries, and you read the oral tradition of the Medrash and the Talmud, you clearly see that, for instance, at the time of Sinai, which we're talking now about 7 generations after Abraham, talking about almost 1,000 years later, that we talk about the idea that God presents the Torah, his blueprint for creation, the cosmic blueprint. He offers it to the children of Esau and the children of Ishmael and the children of Esau. So you clearly see that they are characters in history, and especially as it unfolds over the centuries and the millennia. So indeed, when you look at the Zohar, the classic work of Jewish mysticism, and other sources, they talk about that at the end there will be a major confrontation. Throughout history there will be confrontations, because you're talking about making peace between the divine purpose of creation and creation itself. And that doesn't come easily. It's a very tenuous relationship between matter and spirit, between self-survival, self-interest, and transcendence. So some take an aggressive approach, others take a lesser aggressive approach. But you can imagine there'll be confrontations when these passions come alive. Ultimately, with Islam, especially radical Islam, feeling that they are the chosen people and they need to control the world because God wants that. And when then when you deal with the Christian passions and then Jewish passions, you really have yourself a volatile mix that is going to be toxic. Therefore we need to go back to Abraham and ask Abraham, what do you say? You're the father of all of this. And his answer, Abraham was a man of chesed, of kindness. He said, I want you to bring God. I want you to bring purpose. I want you to bring transcendence into a selfish and commercial and money and power and ego-driven world. But you need to know how to do it in a peaceful way, not through battles. Especially my children shouldn't be battling. But you see, this is not new. Long before Islam, there was Christianity that was extremely aggressive and violent. And of course, the Jews were always at the brunt, being, you can call it the older cousin if you wish, but preceding them all, meaning preceding all the other major religions. And the bottom line, it was always a violent interaction. Says the Zohar that these confrontations will come to a head at the end of time. And we are in that period right now. And will ultimately be exposed. So as painful as this is, there's something about it called clarity. Everything coming out of the woodwork. Let everyone reveal their true colors. That's what's happening right now. And then the Zohar says there'll be the end of the war. And that will be a permanent end, because ultimately the divine purpose and existence will be integrated. And all peoples of the world, no matter what religion, Christianity, Islam, Jews, Judaism, or of no religion, or any, will all ultimately, in their diversity, unite under one banner, that we're all here as part of God's bigger plan. Each of us an indispensable musical note in the grand cosmic symphony. And when we'll recognize that, we'll respect each other's being and existence. And not just existence, but value, and realize that we are not complete without them. I know it's a far cry from what you're seeing right now. You see all this violence and you see all this war and bloodshed. But when you think of it in that context, then they say there's the silence before the storm. There's also the storm before the silence. So the storms that we're seeing, the explosions, and hopefully it ultimately comes to the end of it all. And sometimes you have to face the enemy. In other words, this approach cannot be one of appeasement and naivete and say, we're all looking for world peace. When you're facing an enemy, you've got to realize there's an enemy. You have to do what has to be done. And sometimes the best defense is offense. But in the end story is one of peace, that all peoples will recognize the divine image that everyone else was created in. That's what Abraham would say. And I know that because I've studied the words of Abraham, and I've studied his commentaries, and I've studied what his children and his grandchildren, who passed on his legacy, have been teaching for thousands of years. And most important, look at history. Same Christianity that once terrorized the world ultimately became the source of building a country like the United States and other free countries around the world. Not perfect countries. Absolutely not. But definitely not a very far cry from where it once was, where there is respect of freedom and institutionalized recognition that all people are created equal and all have inalienable rights. So you have the principles that Abraham taught has become part of the fabric of society today. So what we need to do is embrace that and teach it to everyone we can reach and make it very clear that anyone that's outside of that, we'll call it Abraham's mandate, is ultimately defying God. And yes, you could say everything in the name of God, that you're killing infidels in the name of God, and be the most anti-godly person. That's what Abraham taught. Now, how these distortions came about and why people don't recognize it, and the ultimate irony that they're speaking in the name of God and killing God's children in the name of God, that comes down to brainwashing and propaganda and plain hatred and resentment, and allowing your shame, the shame of the Muslim world, to dominate your life, play the victim. Maybe it's time for them to learn. And I am pulling rank here to the Jewish people who've suffered more than anyone has suffered, and yet we maintained our dignity. We did not become like our persecutors. We remained above it. We were not defined by them. And we continued to hold on to and embrace and disseminate the values of love, of virtue, of kindness. So as we quickly approach to the new year, the Hebrew New Year, which is really a universal new year, is the birthday of the human race. Adam and Eve are common ancestors of every one of the 8 billion people on this planet. So this is a perfect time for us to reconnect to that common ancestor and connect through the values that those common ancestors embraced, and especially as manifested in Abraham and Sarah, as the Bible tells us. So I know some will think this is like being naive. I'm not denying that you need to fight the wars and you need to do what has to be done on the ground level. But the key thing is to remember, the ultimate war is a spiritual one, not a military one. Military is needed because you have to protect lives. So these explosions, the negative ones, the end story is that there'll be an explosion, an eruption, I would say, of tremendous good and tremendous spirituality in the final spiritual revolution. And we're on the verge of it. And even though it may seem very far from that when we look at the events, but remember clarity. Clarity is a prelude. The awareness of a problem is half its cure. Let everyone show their colors. Where do you stand? Are you an anti-Semite? Let us hear about it. Are you a racist? Let's hear about it. Do you discriminate against others? Are you a hater? Are you an insecure, arrogant person concealing your insecurity with your arrogance or with your narcissism? Let's see it all. Let it not be undercover. And that's from the book of Daniel that says that there will be clarity at the end. And that clarity will ultimately bring out from the woodwork the worst and the best, but then we can ultimately say it's not concealed anymore. And as it emerges, it will ultimately lead to a clarity, in the words of Isaiah the prophet, that there will be no more evil and no more destruction, because the world will be filled with divine knowledge as the waters cover the sea. This is our mission, embracing divine knowledge and disseminating it. This is my mission, the mission of the Meaningful Life Center, and hopefully the mission of every human being on this earth. And I've dedicated my life to disseminating that and sharing that. And that comes down to, yes, not just philosophical divine knowledge, it comes down to living a life of kindness, of virtue, of selflessness, of service. That is ultimately the best way to actualize yourself. And understanding how we all need each other to be complete. So with that being said, obviously it's a topic that can use a lot more discussion, but let's commit, especially now when you see all these explosions. Let's commit, especially now as we prepare for the collective birthday of the human race. Let us resolve, each of us, to reach out to 5 new people this week, to 5 new people next week. It can be more, but let's begin with something that people can accomplish, not to bite off more than you can chew. And reach and to share with them a kind word, a word of gratitude, being gracious, a good deed, a charitable act. You never know how you make an impact on a person, because one such good deed and one good word and one good thought tips the scales, in the words of Maimonides, and brings personal and global redemption. May we all be blessed to see that peace in our times, permanent and sustainable, and may we do our part. We're not bystanders. We're not observers. We are part of the unfolding drama. As I always like to say, 3 types of people: people who make things happen, people who watch things happen, and people who ask what happened. Be someone that makes things happen. Be proactive in this effort. At the end of the day, there's only a few degrees of separation between us. And the 8 billion people on this earth are just 8 billion individuals like you and I. And with technology, look how quickly you can accelerate and amplify. Make the message go viral. Again, a positive explosion of goodness and kindness. Everyone be blessed and be well. And please share this with others. Love to hear your comments, your thoughts, your feedback. Please subscribe to our offerings, both at meaningfullife.com and on our YouTube channel, and on Facebook and our other platforms. Again, everyone be blessed, and may we see this peace in our times, and let us do our part from the microcosm to the macrocosm, affecting the ripple and butterfly effect, transforming this world into a divine garden. Thank you.